What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the team at Awesemo, talking some college football DFS ahead of December the 30th. We have 4 games up, 4 games down, but before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. Without further ado, we'll bring you behind the glass to our player data usage tool. Today, we have a 4-game slate on FanDuel, a 3-game slate on DraftKings with a showdown, so we'll start there, where we have South Carolina taking on North Carolina in the Mayo Bowl. 9-point spread in favor of North Carolina, moving to 10 in a lot of spots. South Carolina in the SEC, they are a rough team. Surprising to me that they made bowl season, but most of that came off a very weak non-con schedule. South Carolina tries to play fast and pass heavy. They just have been so efficient in the SEC that they haven't been able to. So I think this game does have a little bit of sneaky shootout potential if South Carolina can keep up. Quarterback for South Carolina is going to be Zeb Noland again. He is not mobile whatsoever. He only averages 100 passing yards per game. Some of that a little bit depressed because of injury, but this should be a spot against North Carolina where the matchup's a little bit better. You can definitely take advantage of the Tar Heels defense, but ultimately I don't have a ton of interest in Zeb Noland at the captain spot. I think you can get better value by playing some of the more expensive guys on the North Carolina side, and overall, he just doesn't have a lot of the upside we look for in that spot, but good utility player overall. In the run game, Zaquandre White entered the NFL draft, so it looks like this is going to be the Kevin Harris show. Don't be surprised to see Marshawn Lloyd and Juju McDowell play a role, but Kevin Harris, he should be getting most of the work here, including the pass game. And this is a spot we can definitely target. There's even just pure PPR value if South Carolina gets down in the game, so like Kevin Harris a bit. In the receiving game, this has been kind of a disaster all year, but Josh Vann is the alpha. He's very expensive. I would rather just play Kevin Harris at a cheaper price, but if for contrarian people, you could play Josh Vann. DeKirian Joyner, he's middling in terms of price, averages 3.5 targets per game. Not great. I would rather probably play one of the tight ends, and Nick Muse or Jaheim Bell. Both of them split time, but they've been pretty targeted when on the field, evidenced by 6 targets for Bell in the last game, 4 for Muse in the last game. And from there, you're looking at some sort of rotation at receiver with like Xavier Legette, Amari Brown. Probably not worth targeting these guys. EJ Jenkins, you can throw him in there too. He actually had 4 targets in the last game, but I think the players you really want to focus on are up at the top, and then your Jenkins, Legettes, Amari and Browns are just dart throws for tournaments. For the North Carolina side, we have obviously the most expensive players over here, starting with Sam Howell, who's going to play in the game, but I would be a little bit worried that he plays full complement of snaps. He's going to enter the NFL draft, so I don't know if you see the full Sam Howell we've seen all year, but he's really mobile, 825 yards on the ground. He averages 260 passing yards per game on 30 attempts. South Carolina certainly doesn't scare you on the other side, so Howell's a great play in a vacuum. You just kind of got to play the game is how much do you think he actually plays here today? And when he's on the field, does he really want to run that much to affect his draft stock? I don't know. I think he's a great play in the flex. Among the receivers, you obviously want to look at Josh Downs. He's averaging 11.5 targets per game, 105 receiving yards. That's fantastic for Downs. He's the preferred option. I think you can play him in the captain spot just because the volume's so condensed. But then Antoine Green and Justin Olsen are pretty interesting for flex plays just because you're getting cheaper attachments to Sam Howell. Green would be the preferred option, but that's reflected in price. 5 targets per game over the last 4. Justin Olsen, he's averaging 3 targets per game in that span, but he's on the field every single play. Tight end, you're going to get a rotation between Kamari Morales and Garrett Walston. I think both are interesting as dart throws, as very cheap options attached to Sam Howell. In the run game, we've seen Ty Chandler effectively get benched. He's been extremely efficient, but for whatever reason, they just don't trust him for that feature back workload he had early in the year. DJ Jones has been hurt, so DJ Jones missed the most recent game. We don't know if he's going to be healthy here, but he's somebody to watch because he was the RB2 splitting time with Chandler prior to injury. With Jones out of their last game, they actually used British Brooks as the lead back. British Brooks, 15 carries to Ty Chandler 6. So to me, I think DJ Jones, if he's active, is by far the best player of this group. He's near the stone min, but we just don't have his injury status. British Brooks and Ty Chandler are pretty middling plays because they're going to split work evenly. Slight preference towards Brooks right now. He just has been playing ahead of Ty Chandler. Looking to the main slate on DraftKings, continuing on with FanDuel, We're going to go to Purdue taking on Tennessee. 6.5-point spread in favor of the Volunteers, 64.5 total. So really good, healthy game total overall here. Both teams play extremely fast. Purdue's very pass heavy. Tennessee's very run heavy under their dual threat. Aiden O'Connell is the starting quarterback for Purdue, but he is going to be working without his top two receivers, David Bell and Milton Wright. Bell opted out. Milton Wright is injured. And O'Connell is an interesting player to look at here. He's expensive. He's not mobile. So he relies on overcoming that negative yardage from sacks with pure passing volume. And Purdue throws the ball so much. When he does have his elite options, this is pretty easy for him. But today, down his top two options, I do have a little bit of questions with this, but the volume is going to be there for tournaments, so he's still definitely in play. And now you're probably stacking him with Jackson Anthrop, who's an interesting player. He's very active in the run game as well. He's 21 carries on the year, but Anthrop should be walking into an enormous target share. David Bell's vacating 134 targets. Milton Wright's vacating 78. That's over 200 targets that are gone from the offense. So Anthrop's in a good spot. The wide receiver 2 and 3 should be TJ Sheffield and Brock Thompson, both very cheap. Sheffield's really cheap on FanDuel if you're looking there. Both of them should be playing a much higher role today. And then Payne Durham. He should be playing a lot here too. Interestingly, he's the tight end, so he's been mixing time with Garrett Miller down the stretch. I'm not sure if that's going to continue today. Durham's more of a receiving threat, so he might see more work just because this team is down so many options in the pass game. In the run game, we saw the backfield flip back towards Xander Horvath coming off that leg injury midseason. Doerr was playing ahead of him, but it seems as Horvath's gotten healthier, it's back to the split we initially expected this year, with Horvath handling about 70% of the work, Doerr 30%, and Dylan Downing an afterthought. So Horvath is the play if you're looking to the run game. For Tennessee, Hendon Hooker is the best quarterback play on the slate in a vacuum. He's extremely mobile, 561 yards. He averages 215 as a passer. Purdue is not only down their top two receivers, but their best defensive player in Karlaftis. So edge rush is affected. Hooker's mobile. He's just a good play overall, a safe play. Ceiling's there because of the game environment. And he's returning next year to the team. So there's no risk of him leaving the game. In the run game, we saw Tyon Evans transfer. Makes sense. He just didn't have the role he thought he would this year. So probably going to a lesser program now where he can handle more work. But that leaves Jabari Small and Jalen Wright as the top two backs. They should split time evenly, so the price difference between them doesn't make any sense. Jalen Wright's the better play on both platforms. They're basically splitting work 50-50, and Wright's actually handled 28 carries to Small's 26, so dead even split. Both are active in the pass game too, so just go on Wright. Jabari Small for tournaments. In the receiving game, also very clear, they run the same three receivers in the field every single play. It's Cedric Tillman, Velus Jones, and Javonte Payton. They don't use Javonte Payton, so it's pretty easy to narrow this down to Velus Jones and Cedric Tillman. Velus is the best price-adjusted play, averaging 5.6 targets per game compared to 6.3 for Tillman, who's nearly $2,500 more expensive than Velus Jones. You can still play Tillman. Salary's not too much of an issue on this slate, but Velus is the better price-adjusted play. And then you're going to have Jacob Warren splitting time with Princeton Fence at tight end. Ramel Keaton and Jalen Hyatt sometimes mix on the field as receivers, but it's basically Tillman, Jones, and Payton every single play. Going to our next game, we have Michigan State taking on Pittsburgh. Game wildly affected by opt-outs, but currently the total's 55.5, 3-point spread in favor of the Spartans. No Kenneth Walker for Michigan State, no Kenny Pickett for Pittsburgh. I believe Pittsburgh losing Pickett is the more impactful loss here, reflected in the spread. But for Michigan State, we still have playmakers. Peyton Thorne is there. He will be the architect of this slow, run-heavy Michigan State offense. They do try to play with pace at times, so there's a chance that Pittsburgh puts them into this sort of environment. Thorne is mobile, 167 yards on the ground this year. He averages 240 as a passer through pure efficiency. And fortunately, his top two receivers are back. Jaden Reed's been there the whole time. Jalen Naylor is returning from that hand injury. These guys were dead even in terms of targets when healthy. Naylor actually was targeted a little bit more prior to the injury. So Naylor at 5,500 would be the guy I look at, but you can't go wrong with Jaden Reed either. Trey Mosley goes back to his wide receiver 3 role. You're not going to see 3.8 targets per game from him, probably closer to 2.5. And then Conor Hayward is the seldom used tight end. He's listed at running back, so he's basically unplayable. In the running game, this is a tough situation to decipher. Jordan Simmons had been the change of pace back all year, but similar to the North Carolina situation, he gets hurt and misses their final game. He is healthy to play, but we just don't know what the split is going to look like between him and Elijah Collins. Harold Joyner's there. Joyner's just going to be a change of pace. But we flat out don't know if it's going to be Elijah Collins or Jordan Simmons. Collins was injured through most of the year, so it's not that Simmons was working ahead of him necessarily. It's just Collins wasn't on the field. So only 12 carries on the year for Collins, 9 of which came in their last 3 games. I think this is probably pretty close to a 50-50 split, but Simmons is the stone min, so he's the guy I'll prefer. But ultimately, look for a rotation at running back here. Pitt plays pretty good defense, so I don't know if this is a desirable player or not. Pretty good for tournaments, though. For Pittsburgh, Nick Patty comes in. He's going to be the signal caller. He's shown some mobility in the past, which is solid. I think at a cheap price, that's definitely something you want for the floor. Ultimately, the offense is great. It's fast. It's pass heavy. It's just, can Patty play well enough to kind of backdoor his way into a good score? And like, they lost their offensive coordinator, so I do have some questions with him, but he's just so cheap in a good game environment that he makes sense in these kind of builds. He's also working with basically all his pass catchers. Taysier Mack not going to play in the game, opted out, but he hasn't been playing for weeks anyway. It's Jordan Addison, the best receiver in the country, Jared Wayne, Lucas Carroll, Shockey Jacques-Louis. They're all still there. So, I mean, based on the receiver talent, I think there's a decent chance Patty could just backdoor his way into production. Addison's averaging 14 targets per game, and he's the best play on DraftKings in a vacuum. On FanDuel, there's some merit to playing Josh Downs over him, I think, but Addison's, man, hard to get away from. Outside of Addison, Jared Wayne's the wide receiver, 5.5 targets per game over the last 4. Lucas Carroll very involved as the tight end. He's playing in the game, 5 targets per game over the last 4. And then Shockey Jacques-Louis, their burner, just 2.5 targets per game, but most of those targets are coming downfield. They do use 2 tight ends a lot, which affects Jacques-Louis, takes him off the field. But that's going to be Gavin Bartholomew who comes on. 2 targets per game for him. Big red zone threat. In the run game, it's a 3-way timeshare. Vincent Davis, Israel Abanikanda, Rodney Hammond. This backfield ebbs and flows, so it's very hard to determine who is the lead back week to week. A lot of it comes down to the hot hand. Vincent Davis is the cheapest. He's also the least efficient on the year. Throw your darts, not cash plays. Last game is Wisconsin, Arizona. Lowest total, 40.5, 6-point spread in favor of Wisconsin. Both teams are very slow and run heavy, and I don't anticipate whichever one falls down in this game changing their game plan. Wisconsin, Graham Mertz is entirely inept, not running. He doesn't have any running ability. He doesn't have any passing ability. Tournament play only, probably not worth considering outside of big fields. The run game, this has become condensed throughout the year. They lost Malusi, they lost Berger, they lost Garendo. Braylon Allen, 17-year-old freshman, is the lead back, and he projects for an immense workload. Arizona State plays middling run defense, but Braylon's had at least 22 touches in 3 straight games. He saw increased pass game work in their final game, 6 targets. That more than doubled his season total. So Allen's the best play at running back in a vacuum. Pretty easy to play both Addison and Allen. Receiving game, you might get some cheap value here. Wisconsin will throw the ball a decent amount in competitive games. I just don't see that being the case here. But Ferguson at 4K is their target leader. He's second on the team in receiving yards. He's 4K, so I mean, you can fit him in pretty easy. Danny Davis, 4,600. I'd rather just play Ferguson. Kendrick Pryor, 4K. I wouldn't like playing Davis just because of the price. Save the 600. It doesn't really make a ton of sense. Jameer Dyke, he's a situational wide receiver 3. Wisconsin players should just fill out your roster if they make sense, but probably going to cheaper guys like the Purdue receivers. Arizona State, they're one of the most depleted teams in all bowl season. Jaden Daniels is returning, but he just doesn't have any volume in this inept Herm Edwards offense. Daniels is mobile, 670 yards, which is positive. He's just way too expensive. He doesn't have any passing upside. He averages 185 yards per game through the air. In the backfield, Rashad White, he left. DeMonte Trayanum, he left. So Daniel Nada looks like the lead back. He has 45 carries in the year. No other back has more than 9. So you should be working into a massive workload. And there's a lot to be had as a receiver here. Rashad White vacates 48 targets and a 17% target share. So Nada might just be a guy that gets pure PPR volume. It's as difficult as a matchup as you can imagine, but the volume is so good for Arizona State. No matter what the game script is, they just slam these running backs into the back of their offensive line. So ton of volume, like 30 carries is definitely in the realm of possibility for Nada. You just don't know what the split's going to look like, so he's volatile. In the receiving game, this is a mess. Johnny Wilson's hurt, not expected to play. Gordon Porter, he transferred. Ricky Pearsall's the only guy that really has any consistent volume at 5,100. I'd rather just play Anthrop, but Maybe there's some upside. Tough matchup. Wisconsin didn't have any opt-outs on defense, so you're going into the teeth there. LV Bunkley Shelton hasn't been healthy. We don't know his status. Brian Thompson's played an elevated role with Shelton out. Don't know how that looks. There's Curtis Hodges. Andre Johnson returned to the lineup in their most recent game, but wasn't targeted. Elijah Badger. They're going to use like 6 receivers. That's probably out of the question for me. But that's the slate. That'll do it for us. I think Addison and Braylon Allen are pretty clearly the top 2 plays. Hooker at quarterback. But let me know in the comments your favorite play. I'm Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you again.